Great. No, so thank you for the introduction, Carl. Great to join the folks who've been up here already. The idea behind this session first came to the US. I kept going to conferences with fireside chats, and I didn't understand the history. So, a decade ago, somebody pointed out the presidential link to fireside chats. It wasn't something we were familiar with in the UK. But I've really liked the format over the years, seeing people just interact and talk about topics that are dear to their heart. And believe me, DDoS is truly dear to Sean's heart and my heart. We know that from working together for the last couple of years. So with that introduction, Sean, where should we get started about DDoS and the things you've done, or the things we've had parallel lives almost in DDoS? It's surprising we didn't meet until 2 years ago.
It really is insane. But before I get to that, I would like to say a couple of things. Number one, to Robin, to you, Carl, and anybody else in the audience who served in the military forces in your respective countries, thank you for your service. Really appreciate it. That goes to the heart of why I'm so passionate about DDoS. I believe that everybody in this room does super important work. You don't hear it enough. You have a thankless job. To the points that were made earlier, you never get the pat on the back, and your teams never get a pat on the back. But what you do matters, and what your teams do matters. And the landscape now is changed more so than it ever has. So I really do want to say thank you for being servant leaders, and thank you for your teams for staying in the fight every day. Going back to our careers, which is crazy, I've been in security for 29 years. I know I don't look that old, but in that timeline, I started out always in security, but I was acquired several times in my career. And the first time I was acquired, I actually was acquired by McAfee and spent some time there. Yeah. And it's odd that we didn't run into each other there, because we did both host intrusion prevention as well as network intrusion prevention.
Yeah, it's strange that this would be like 12 or so years ago. IPS, intrusion prevention systems, probably one of the billion-dollar building blocks in cybersecurity, I think. I mean, the requirements to have an IPS somewhere in your network was linked to a lot of compliance, such as PCI compliance and other things. Plus, it was a good idea because cybersecurity threats and companies connecting to the internet was exposing more and more compute resources to malicious activity. But around that time, the big guys, the Symantec's and the McAfee's, had sort of grown it into a mature dinosaur business. You could sell those boxes. Do you remember on the lists of, we passed 99, we detect 99% of the threats or something, and they'd run these huge test-offs or bake-offs. Most of the threats were like old and stale, and you weren't running into them on a day-to-day basis, but they would run through this giant list, charge a lot of money, and then what we would find is a lot of customers had them plugged in, but they weren't actually blocking anything, or nobody was looking at the alerts. It was just a check-the-box compliance issue. And that's where I joined the Corero business, was in that era. And that's one of the reasons we forked off into DDoS. So I don't know what made you jump off of, McAfee into DDoS, Sean.
Very similar to the dinosaur conversation. No, I am not one, but yes, the industry grew to that. I had an opportunity to join a company called Prolexic, which was a cloud-based only DDoS solution company. And I was working at McAfee at the time, responsible as a product line executive for data encryption and data compliance. And I flew down to Fort Lauderdale, and I met with a very small dynamic group of people that had this thing called cloud-based DDoS protections. And a couple of friends were working there, and I'm like, why would I leave this big company and come work here? And you guys say that and gals say that you're in security. Bank of America spends, at the time, $3 million a year with us on endpoint security. Why in the heck do they need your stuff? And so sure enough, I go to dinner and I find out that Bank of America is also a customer of Prolexic, 12 years ago. And here's why. And so when I learned about the availability story and the fact that there's criticality and and often forget about service because we take it for granted, DNS going down or your core capabilities going down. Really, DDoS is something that you need to have in your arsenal defense to make sure that your operations are up and running smoothly. And so that's the reason why I went to work there. I went to work there because of the mission, and the mission of serving others and making sure that you were defending against cyber terrorists. 12 years ago, it wasn't as crazy as it is today. I'd like to say that the teenagers with the Birkenstocks and the hooded sweatshirts launching kiddie scripts are over. We're dealing with well-funded nation states and adversaries that are really trying to mess with our ways of life.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that last statement, that it feels, particularly in the last year or so, maybe with the geopolitical situation, it's got mean and serious on the cybersecurity side of things. It's not just criminal activity for dollars now. It's more than that, So I definitely have seen that progression too over the last 10 years. It was interesting too with the IPS world transitioning into DDoS. The company that was mentioned earlier, Top Layer, they had an IPS with a little bit of DDoS, and that's when I came into the company and sort of recognized that the crown jewel of their work over the previous decade, which is the time Joao was mentioning, really was this DDoS technology they patented and they developed experience with, and that's what we then refreshed in the SmartWall product line and then added onto with our engineering efforts, and that's what's become the platform that today as a partner, and our customers, several of whom are here, they know also. So in those early days, I remember DDoS. Also, somebody mentioned people didn't know what it was. Like your parents, your parents ask you what you work on, and you say DDoS, and they're like, "Well, what's that?" That changed too in that last 10 years. I mean, it was only a few years.
They didn't ask you to fix their PCs because you were in IT?
But a few years later too, they'd seen DDoS in the newspaper, or they'd heard the word DDoS, so that changed too. I mean, you remember those days where new vectors were being discovered, new defenses were being written. The early ramp was very steep. Prolexic was way out in front in the cloud space, I remember.
Yeah, if I
In fact, they were the only guys for a while, right?
Well, yes, we were, back then it was really the established vendors that were in place in regards to Arbor and Radware back probably, if you go all the way back to 2012, that's really when we first saw really nation state activity, Project Abigail. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, Google that. That was a crazy scenario. It's probably one of my most, that and another one. I'll give you two quick stories that were most memorable. That one was most memorable because for those of you not familiar from the United States, there's this term called eminent domain, which means the government comes in and says, okay, you're part of the federal government now. There was a period of time for about 10 days where the UK's global economy and North America's global economy was sitting on literally a cloud-based system that was being held together in Fort Lauderdale with 200 people. And that's not a joke. There was vulnerabilities that were attacked back then in appliances that didn't have the capability to move across attack vectors very quickly. So a nation state actually acquired technology from those technology vendors and spent 6 weeks, 24 hours a day, 3 shifts of people trying to find that anomaly. And they launched attacks, multiple attacks at those appliances, such that when it got to a point of almost a pattern match 5 minutes in, it would launch a different attack and it would flood the memory in that box and knock everything down. So anything that was in your wallet, all of your financial institutions, they were all on our platform. That was an aha moment for me. And from that day, I think it really galvanized the mission of our solutions and who we are as a people. I really believe that coupled with the capabilities that we now need in regards to a hybrid solution in the world that we're facing, the partnership with Corero has really strengthened our ability to solve all use cases. not just some of the use cases. The broad portfolio we have in the cloud, along with our layer 7 capabilities in the cloud, coupled with what we're moving forward with Corero and solving our customers' problems there, is really a unique story. And I believe arguably the most powerful story relative to threat intelligence and specifically to DDoS. The second thing I would say from a story that's left an indelible mark on me is fast forward, 2023, December. We all get that cyber terrorists are out there and they're trying to, mess with our financial institutions or go after our critical infrastructure or our government. That's one thing. But KillNet, really? Attacking children cancer research hospitals? Are you kidding me? If you don't think that this problem is real and isn't part of warfare, psychological as well as physical, you're in the wrong line of business. So we've got to come together as a community and continue to make sure that we're looking at all of those use cases, all the things that were talked about earlier from our presenters. You need to have purpose-built solutions, platform of platforms. You need to compartmentalize and make sure that you have resiliency and availability. So again, I would just go back that those two world events really had indelible mark, not only on us, but our customers. And to steal, I think it's Jesse's line, the greatest response we ever got from a customer was the CISO and the chairman of the board at the Cancer Research Hospital, and he said he could finally go to bed because he was worried whether or not kids were going to get treatment. So that's a high compliment that you paid to Corero, and it's not taken lightly.
Yeah, no, I think that feeds into this. It's stepped up another level in the last couple of years, and like many of the things we've seen before, we're going to have to live in that world now. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, so we better keep doing a good job with the technologies we work on. And I do agree too that many of our team members and employees they really are white collar warriors in that sense. They'll be up all night if necessary, if there's a particularly challenging situation that a customer needs assistance with, or they'll work all weekends and quietly do that quietly too, not expecting the spotlight. But we know, don't we, from higher up in the companies, that's what makes the difference in these kind of situations.
It's two things. DDoS goes back to what you said, not only about the fabric of the people. I really believe that being in security is about servant leadership and leading teams and helping people. That's kind of in our DNA if you're in the business. But I think that being a SOC operator or dealing with that triage and the pressure and the intensity, communication is required. So if you think about the run books that were mentioned earlier by Corey, operational efficiency, knowing changes that are happening in your customer environment. You need to feel as though whether it's Corero or whoever your top 5 or 7 partners are that are integral into your business, be it from a partner standpoint, go-to-market standpoint, or from a customer use standpoint, really articulating and communicating, right, and seeing us as an extension to your teams. Operationally understanding if projects are coming up, network changes are happening, new applications are rolling out, so that you can get to a positive security model. There's a lot of slides that were flying around earlier that talked about different sizes and types of attacks. And if you think about in this day and age, milliseconds matter, not even seconds. The days of I'll use a line from one of our leaders in the company. Mitigating a 5-minute attack in 15 minutes is a bad thing, right? So the more human you have in the loop, the worse off it is. So having the capability to go to market with a market leader in regards to a solution set with DDoS, and you think about why we chose Corero, was about that experience, it was about customer relationship, and the ability to communicate between SOCs. If you think about our first level of integration, our SOCs are communicating with each other to take care of an on-prem solution set coupled with the ability to fail over in a hybrid world. And that doesn't happen naturally unless you have people who have the same DNA, who care about the customer, who have intimate knowledge and invest time in those customer relationships. So I really think that that's a key to success overall in DDoS because milliseconds matter.
I know because this is a Corero sponsored event. DDoS is the word of the week, but your infrastructure security covers more than just DDoS, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what else are you seeing? That moves the needle in terms of cyber security events.
So I'll talk holistically across our division. So for those of you who haven't seen, we made a recent acquisition, our second acquisition in the space around API security. So thank you, Mr. Watson, for all your help on that as well. So I would say that there's a couple of things. I think the trends that we're seeing are this. I mentioned it earlier, but I think the three tenets that we think about, we've created them to five. One is simplification. If you think about our R&D efforts and how we want products to work, we want them frictionless so customers can get easier to use them. There's another term that somebody in our marketing department, God bless them, they came up with democratization of security tools, right? So yeah, I know. I didn't come up with it, obviously. But at the end of the day, what that really translates to is the concept of you really don't want to have a standard where if you're one of 7 different technologies in a tech stack, and in most of your cases, you probably have 30 technologies in your tech stack, you want to find points of intersection, right, around that technology. So you don't want to be so unique that there's no way that you can find commonality between that tech stack. How can I export to a SIM? How can I export to a SOAR? How can I get that information workflow into your risk profiles so that it's easier for your teams to consume and you're leveraging not only investments in your tech stack and your architectural deployments, but the actual operational workflow of the human beings. And then, of course, the 3 things that we all live by: visibility. If I can't see it, I can't do anything about it. Observability. What's my benchmark and what's the variance? And then actionability. How am I taking action? How quickly can I move from a reactive posture, even with AI, even with large language models? How can I move to enforcement proactively? And so if you think of our big bet, and why we bought 2 companies recently, one was No Name Security, the other was a company, both out of Israel, the other was a company called Neosec. And much like we'll talk later today, you need to have what I call a Swiss Army knife to solve every use case, because use cases are what we're all here about. What is the customer pain? What is the requirement to solve that problem? And then what architecture or variance of that architecture does it exist in? Because just because it works here doesn't mean my product or software or hardware can solve it if it's over here. So what we did in our 2-step approach is we bought API security for a CDN approach, where we could actually have the ability to have software look at anybody who is terminating on our their APIs on our CDN and provide that visibility and store a data lake. And then we also bought a company that was, in essence, not tied to a CDN, could do on-prem, could do multi-cloud, and still provide the same. So our vision is that we believe that API security is going to be a very important place for the next 10 years. Why? All of the LLMs and the signal that you're going to get eventually is going to go and take action. Where is it going to interface to take action? At the API. So we want to provide scalable, visibility, observability, and execution at the API level. Do we think that the APIs are going to be in enforcement day one? No, it's just going to be like we saw with DDoS, specific to layer 3 and layer 4, then to layer 7, in regards to customers getting comfortable with making enforcements proactively. It'll probably be 5 years from now. So that's what we see.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, API, the growth in growth and dependence, to what Rob's point earlier on these newer technology rollouts, like the API-based systems and services these days. And don't get me wrong, it's not that APIs are new, but the scale and the speed with which they're being rolled out now is unprecedented. I mean, we'll talk about that later today too when I reflect on the vision going forward. I mean, we're hungry to adopt these great new technologies and roll them out, but security can't keep up. So we have to have protections like the ones we're working on, because you can't do secure by design on some of these trends. I mean, it's just, you really are like, chasing a thoroughbred in terms of the desire to get out there into the marketplace, and we're like, wait, you've forgotten the security, and they're already gone,
Yeah, and you can tell I'm not built for speed, so
Yeah.
I'm not catching anybody. So I would say that you're spot on with that, and we're all to blame. We put data everywhere, so we have to now protect data everywhere, and we've made it so easy for our development community to stand up instances in multiple clouds, and how do you get granularity across 3 different clouds plus my on-prem? If I go into AWS, the configuration for the firewalling or the DDoS capability is completely different than it is in GCP, so and Azure. So this concept of what you talked about, our jobs, and I open with this, what you all do matters, and it's very, very difficult, and I don't see it slowing down. So the other thing I would say is that it's important for us to do events like this, and it's very important for the community to get together and for us to start finding ways to help each other, even from an industry standard, to allow us to get to a safer, more secure place quicker.
Well, it's interesting, just talking about the public market information that comes from Akamai. I mean, I was living in the Boston area in tech when Akamai got started, just over 25 years ago, right? They've just had the 25th anniversary, and saw what CDN did to this thing we call the internet. The way it helped it grow and stimulate use and support the demand it was generating for high-speed content delivery. But now Akamai is sort of rotating into this security space, isn't it? I saw some great stats on your recent announcement that security compute, in contrast to CDN, are now larger than CDN, and it seems like your security ambitions continue to be upward and to the right. Is that reflected in what you're doing with your teams inside the company?
Yes. So if you think about our core business of CDN delivery, I would argue that, if you mentioned, the mainframe's dead, printers are dead. No, they're not. Are they growing as fast as they once were? No. They're purpose-built to solve a solution. So most people don't recognize it when they get on their banking app, and after they get through their 16 microservices in a nanosecond of clicking a button, that process is handled back on the back end with mainframes. So it's a purpose-built architecture. So when you think of a content delivery network, there's always going to be a need for that. And if you think of the first, let's call it 16 years of our existence, we built security solutions on top of that CDN network because of how people were using it. As we've evolved away, and as customers, have evolved away from not just doing CDN, that business grows slower and it's been more commoditized. So we've taken those investments from that high profitability, slow growth business, and we've invested that in our DDoS capabilities, into our off-platform capabilities, like what we've done with our Guardicore acquisition and our Zero Trust capabilities, as well as our connected cloud. So, DigitalOcean, great solution set. We put our hat in the ring when we picked up Linode, and what we're trying to do is something different than what you would consider a true CSP, right? We know that Akamai's connected cloud is not going to be rivaled in regards to AWS, GCP, Azure. What we intend to do is give customers an alternative with a connected backbone that allows them to get to that CDN, and allows them to get to the Prolexic core network, and allows them to get to applications and or clouds in a secure manner based on that transport.
I think you're being modest there when you say give them an alternative, because they do need it. I mean, the way they're developing solutions and applications these days, we all recognize public cloud is fantastic, but it's not the 100% solution. You need a blend of platforms and capabilities and services. So I'm very bullish that we'll continue to see this hybrid environment for deployment, and that will continue to drive the need for hybrid security solutions like hybrid DDoS or, as you were saying, API security in more than one domain or context.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think everybody in this room would absolutely validate the statement that the promise of the cloud is over. There's a purpose for things that live in the cloud and will always stay in the cloud, but everything's not moving to the cloud. People will have things in multiple clouds. They'll have hybrid environments where they're co-located. Some people will choose to always have data centers of their own, brick and mortar, and some will get out of the real estate business and just move here. But I think that for the long term, we're going to see that customers are going to have those types of environments, which again puts tremendous operational stress on customers and partners to be able to have visibility, observability, and executability across those three different paradigms.
Yeah, one other thing I was going to ask you, I mean, Corero's a global company, even though we're much smaller than Prolexic, but we don't really see any difference whether it's our customers in Asia Pac or South America, the North American continent or Europe. I wondered if in Akamai, who truly have a global footprint to a couple of orders of magnitude larger than ours, does Akamai see a difference in cybersecurity around the globe in the way it's happening or developing? Have you come across east-west differences or the kind of obviously we've got some major large countries that we track very closely. Does Akamai see a global variation in cybersecurity threats, or are your customers pretty much asking for the same thing the world over?
I believe that based on the intelligence that we're allowed to share based on our relationship, we've validated points of view. I'll give you a perfect example. Everybody remembers the GitHub attack, 1.2 terabits per second. Both Akamai and Corero, before our partnership, were tracking that for weeks ahead of time. And so we got a bunch of press out of it because GitHub was our customer, and we had proactively put up the ACL countermeasures. But unbeknownst to us, Corero was also tracking it based on the visibility engines and capabilities that you had as well. So it was only after we got into an NDA type of a relationship where we looked at our OEMs that we were able to share that information historically from the background. So it's based on, if you think about Prolexic specifically, talking about layer 3, layer 4, cloud-based DDoS, we've got about 700 of the largest customers in the world. And if you think of their 65 to 70% of them are running in an always-on posture through our global mitigation centers, of which there's 32. And if you think about the data that we're gleaning from that, we have in essence about, let's call it 20 terabits of available traffic across those 32 centers. If I were to look at that from an always-on posture and then look at, again, very large, globally dispersed customers, that's a perspective. If you were then to take your environment and say, the 130 customers you have, average deployment of X, you're probably looking at 130 terabits per second, right, of traffic based on the multi-tenancy that you currently have with your customers. So it really is a better together story because of the fact that you may see things in a different market segment than we have. I would definitely say that, if you go out to the acled.com, it was originally started in Sussex County in the UK, and for some reason the doctor who founded that moved to, of all places, Wisconsin, not Minnesota, sorry. I guess she didn't want blue ears for the winter. But long story longer, she created an index, a global index that's talking about active conflict location evidence data. And it's very interesting. And it talks about the geopolitical environment. And off the top of my head, I believe it's 1 in 6 people globally have been somehow affected by geopolitical conflicts. And there's 50 countries right now that are either categorized as, high, catastrophic, and I forget what the other third one is, critical probably. And we've seen the influence of the geopolitical state, rising. So we've seen a tremendous amount of DDoS activity, specifically out of the UK, and we have for probably the last 6 quarters. The other threat that we've seen, is, let me check the audience. Yeah, last time I used this, I had to explain what it was, and now you'll all laugh. But DNS is the dial tone of the internet. Question? What's a dial tone? Are you kidding me? So what we've seen is that 64% of attacks are going after DNS. So if you think about your customers or your partners or your third-party suppliers, make sure that you're staying aware of DDoS threats specifically to DNS. Not only the DNS attacks, but also the fact that we're seeing more and more of the cyber terrorists also trying to ping your CNAMEs to see if you've registered them, and if you left them open, they'll take over your registry and then use that to get the keys to the kingdom in your environment. So those would be the other 2 things.
Yeah, so that's DNS attacks, meaning not DNS amplification used as an attack, but actually attacking DNS infrastructure of customers, right? These sort of non-existent domain style attacks that are going on at the moment and exposing. I guess it's really just DNS. It is the weakest link at the moment in a lot of people's infrastructure. They haven't invested in it like they have done in some of their other areas. Load balancers for capacity, but puny little DNS resources sometimes being their own name servers. Yeah.
Well, and to that end, one of the other things that when we first got together after we shared the information about the GitHub attack was also the interesting point that we both realized that somebody with on-prem DNS gear could literally be taken offline for a 10 meg attack.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to generate 10 meg traffic, right? So I guess 3 things I would also highlight that we both saw and continue to see is targeted attacks around horizontal attacks. Sometimes they're horizontal attacks vertical attacks that we've seen. Horizontal attacks, and sometimes refer to them as carpet bagging attacks. Right?
We call them carpet bombing. Yeah, let's spread spectrum. That's right. Yeah.
And that's where the cyber terrorists continue to try to go across your entire IP address space to find vulnerabilities. One of the attacks, I went back to our SOC before our presentation today and just said, give me 3 unique attacks, one around, horizontal and duration, one around innovation, and one around, proactive security policies. And I'll talk to the DNS one first, which is innovation. There were 10 financial services firms that were having issues with their on-prem gear, and they needed, and for whatever reason, they needed their DNS hosted locally based on their choice and or regulation. So we were able to create a new product from our carrier solution with recursive DNS that allows us to proxy their actual DNS environment and create a shield, hence we named the product Shield, to help customers deal with NX domain attacks. And that's an example of targeted attacks by cyber terrorists to try to not...
So rather than outsourcing their DNS to somebody else, they were able to protect their on-prem or their on-network DNS, okay?
Correct. Trying to find operational ways for them to leverage their environment. And then probably, I won't talk about the third one, but I would say the one that was interesting from a duration standpoint, we had a campaign that lasted 3 days from a financial services customer. It was ongoing about 131 gig, SYN, NTP, and DNS. But what was interesting was it generated 55,000 alerts, okay? And it attacked 25 different prefixes and over 3,800 individual IP addresses. So very motivated attacker, again, going after a very sophisticated, large financial institution. Does that happen all the time? No, but the toolkits and the mindset to go after that are out there.
Proof of existence of those kind of attacks there. Great, that's great. Any opening up questions for Sean? Or?
Sean, I really love for you to, one of my passions is to understand like where technology is going and where it's reticent to have availability protections, and the crowd seems to be running towards it, right? So an example might be SASE solutions or CASB solutions or MFA I mentioned, so, you know, and a lot of them these days are security oriented, right? They're sort of, you can almost be building single points of failure into your future in trying to offload and consolidate your security posture, right? And one of the things I loved about Akamai is that you have such an amazing resiliency in everything that you've done. It's almost like the equivalent of Bank of America for IT, right? It's a too big to fail kind of scenario, right, for you. I'd just like you to opine on, you know, when you look at building out your solutions and having other companies that have security solutions that don't have an availability pop mindset. You know, do you think about those things as you're going through, you know, this new vendor that's got a pop infrastructure that's not really designed around availability, doesn't have a DDoS solution, doesn't really have that integrated. Do you see people trying to source? I guess what I'm trying to say is two questions. One is, do you think about the availability of the non-infrastructure based stuff at Akamai? I suspect it's yes. And do you see other people not thinking about availability in your competitive set or in other security vendors that are out there?
So I guess the question to both would be yes. If you think about, you know, customers, partners, even, you know, manufacturers, OEMs, ourselves, we're like Noah's Ark. We got a pair of everything. So the CFO is knocking at the door going, what are you doing? And what do I need? And how can I consolidate? Because again, over the last 5 years, this department decided that they were going to use this. I mean, I think one of the stats I found out the other day is that we had 30 different, you know, ticketing systems, right? That were interfacing based on different project or program management. So it's just, you can imagine in a person of 12,000 people, which really isn't that big, but in our standard, there's a lot of decisions that are made either by business unit level or from a divisional level, even before the large scale Akamai level. And then there's also the requirements of, you know, geopolitical requirements for compliance and or for individual decision making in those regions. So my answer to you would be customers want vendor rationalization, partners want vendor rationalization, we want vendor rationalization. Where we believe the market is going is to a platform of platforms. And I use the word platform because, you know, people would talk about an integrated solution. They would talk about an integrated stack, or they would talk about a bundle, or they would talk about points of integration and consolidating all these products into one. The single point of failure is proof that we can't do that. And purpose-built architectures is where the future is, tied to business use cases. And then as long as there's a way to, at least at a common ground, have a plane that provides visibility and orchestration, I think that's where we're headed. And that's what we're betting on, is that we at Akamai know that we're not going to be all things to all people. And we are specifically looking at our areas of domain expertise that tie into where we think is an adjacent market segment that our customers want us to go into. And we're very conservative about that. However, we also know that nobody wants to go into our portal, right? The customer interface from now moving forward is the API, because the customer and the partner wants to create that unification based on their approach. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
So I work in the CSP space. I was wondering if you could talk to the financial economics of things. I mean, I'm in financial jail.
They let you out? You on parole? What's going on?
I mean, but on a serious note, I mean, I heard some numbers being thrown around, and I was cringing in my seat. But I have to pay circuit, bills. So when I get DDoS attacks, that's like bandwidth my customers could be using. I'll give you practical examples. As in, we had a volumetric DDoS attack that took out a couple of hypervisors. Customers couldn't. We have thousands of VMs, on the hypervisor. Customers can power them on. So, I wonder if you could talk to the financial, because I've been following along, but very little on the financial economics of the impact of DDoS.
Well, so, I mean, it depends on, what study you want to look at. Every 3 months, they publish a new stat that says the cost of a DDoS attack is, I think it's up to $9 million now in regards to an outage, and depending on how long the outage is. And that's just tied to revenues. It's not tied to brand awareness. It's not tied to brand degradation. It's not tied to, customers' loss. It's just tied to revenue. So it's very, very hard to quantify. And also, if you put on the hat of the, CFO, right, which we hear all the time, which is, okay, wait a minute. 5 years ago, I was spending X. Now I'm spending 10X. And every time I turn up, there's a breach. People are immune to everything that's happening. Is it going to get any better? And so I think the answer is to quantify the outages. You have to get to this proactive approach. And in your situation, dealing with, hyperscalers, the question is, at what point is the native tool good enough, right? And at what point do you have to then look at the risk profile of, do I have to spend X of dollars per month based on the revenue that's generated there? And to your point, I'm sure that, in your environment, it's not like you have a dedicated financial person assigned to your team. Of course not. That is now going to look at your business at that level and say, okay, help me understand from a business process, how many of my customers are leveraging this virtualized stack in a hypervisor, and what happens if that goes down for 4 hours, right? What happens if AWS East goes down for 4 hours? Because that never happens, right? I get a note from my customers, time for lunch, we'll be back in 4 hours, right? So all joking aside, there's significant cost to that, right? Well, yeah, and then just even the revenue, and then, again, going back to availability, which, back when you were selling, SunGuard and the days of ComDisco, yes, I'm that old, it was about doing tests. What kind of failover tests are you allowed to do during that? And chances are very little, because you have this much of a window to do your updates and notify your customers of a change that's going on. And sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, we're going to take you down for an hour at this time to do a patch or an update. Nobody's going to let you fail over. So then this all goes back to, what is the true cost of the impact? I can't answer that or quantify that for you, but what I can do is point you to something that we do, right, with our customers, is try to get them to articulate. You use the word crown jewels all the time. It always comes down to Pareto's principle. And trust me, I am not a math person. I graduated college in 4 years by taking 6 lab sciences. I dropped out of withdrawal passing with finite mathematics. That's it. But I will tell you, 80-20 is always the rule. 80% of your revenue is going to come from 20% of the assets that you have in your enterprise, whether it be on-prem, in the cloud, or co-located. If you can quantify those cost savings, then you can have a more intelligent conversation with finance, because they don't understand. And they don't know where it is. They think, oh, it's in the cloud, AWS is going to protect it. They will to a certain extent. Now, do you need to bring a third party into that cloud to meet additional requirements that you have for your business? I would argue maybe. On the 20% of the assets that are generating 80% of revenue, absolutely. For everything else, I think there's always a cost-benefit analysis, right? If you could secure everything all the time and have all the resources to do it, you do it. We don't live in that world. Yeah.
2 years ago, I think Palo Alto had a CVE introduced as a reflection attack to amplify the DDoS attack. And I haven't seen anyone get sued because they were used to create a DDoS attack. But when security vendors start being used, do you think that this is something that, if it continues to happen or happens again, where organizations will be at risk of being financially responsible, be it the manufacturers or the end user?
I got 2 words for you: Patch Tuesday.
Before there was a CVE announced, yes.
No, I understand. So what I would say is, all joking aside, I don't know where the regulation's going to continue to hit. I know that for the first step, CISA in the States put out a pledge to the point that you're talking about, to try to get OEMs and security to sign up. We did at RSA. They had a big booth to get people to come up and sign up around vulnerabilities to try to have, quote unquote, a treatise. I would tell you that even in my experience, when our developers or our engineering teams find something in the wild, or our threat hunting teams or our InfoSec teams find something in the wild, the first thing that we're due is we end up in an embargo, right, on TOP red, where you can't talk to anybody other than the governing body to get a hold of the vendor that you found the flaw in, and then they're given typically 30 days to fix that flaw before it's published. And then again, there's no compensation back to the partner community, to the vendor, or to the customer, who now have to go out and patch that, right? And the criticality of that patch and the disruption to the business operation. So going back to the point that Jesse made in regards to your point, Daniel, is what is the impetus of the industry? How is this ever going to get any better? And where's the accountability?
I'm not so worried about with the manufacturer of Lehman. It's now I'm Southern Company,
Yeah.
as a real example, who would then use my titles to attack Joe's business across the street. Can Joe's business, and will there be at some point a requirement to have DDoS actually facing backwards? Make sure that I'm protecting outside world from me DDoS
Right.
from my mistake.
I understand where you're going with that. And the answer would be, from a liability standpoint, it's not there yet, because you didn't have control of that. You acquired, the way I would view it, and again, I didn't stay at the Holiday Inn Express last night, I stayed here, and I'm not an attorney, but the way that I would interpret that is, you have a master services agreement with Palo Alto in this case. You didn't make any modifications to the appliance or the virtualized appliance that you deployed, and based on that, you expected it would perform as advertised. So in my book, you would be held harmless and not liable for any limitation based on the vendor. The vendor's a different story. And I haven't seen anybody really capitalize on a vulnerability to that extent.
There's a little bit of dialogue going on with SolarWinds, I think. Still back to the SolarWinds.
Something happened there?
And I think it was around like negligence. It was like it wasn't first it was the cover-up stuff, but I think recently there's been something that just it should have been better, kind of thing.
Agreed. Any other questions? I know everybody's hungry.
Do you think that vendor liability would actually change vendor behavior? Would it actually, like back to Daniel's question, maybe it's to you the question, but I mean, if they were liable, what could they do? I mean, obviously no one wants to reduce vulnerabilities, so would it actually making them liable for something like that actually change how they design or implement code? Would it actually be for the better?
So to your point, I mean,
The lawyers would get richer.
yeah, I think to your point, I think there's two things there, right? So Jason, one would be, I don't know how you quantify it. I think it would have to be base fines based on some kind of record. Customers can get, when they have a breach, right, there's a process and then there's a penalty. So if they're negligent, then they're going to get fined. Do I think it's going to come the vendor way? Eventually it has to, to the point that Jesse was making, because the CFO's continuing to knock on the door. To your other question about will it make it better standing if you have better resilience? Yes, I think today that customers and partners pick and choose their trusted status with customers based on who they are culturally, how they interact, and the quality of the solutions they have. So I think that availability in code and testing are all things that you want to put your name on, your personal brand within your organization. And then the third thing I would say is, holy moly, this is going to get a lot more complicated with Chat GPT and large language models writing code and people covering it off as themselves, right? So there's already tools now looking at code vulnerabilities that are being used in source code that's available in open source, right? So I think the problem's going to get tougher, not easier, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right?
So, it's interesting. So I spent some time in cyber intel, and one of the things that became very clear to me, and I think we all need to, it's more common, is understand why the bad guys are good at what they do. And what they're much better at us than doing is sharing. Sharing information, sharing themselves.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And it's interesting when you said, under NDA, we share.
Yeah.
I mean, but how can we improve that? How can we, because we have to get better at it. I don't know how, but
We get better at it by doing the greater good collectively as a society and realizing that if I have a conversation with Ash, he's not going to take what we talked about and go try to market it against us. And we have that relationship, right? But it took us, 2 months to get to that point because we share stuff all the time, about what's happening in the betterment of customers. And although, we have, the top, let's call it 30, IT leaders that go into a room up in Congress, right? No offense, I haven't touched a keyboard in 25 years building anything other than basic, right? So at the end of the day, am I really the person in the room that should be representing, corporate interests around a sharing of intelligence around 25 different, world leading countries? No, it should be, right, the people with hands on keyboard to say, this is what we're seeing, or our threat intel groups. We do it behind the scenes. So, we have people, great story. We have a gentleman in Ohio who I'll leave nameless. He literally thought he was getting punked and somebody was like messing with him. But he got a package at his door and somebody delivered it to him and he thought it was a joke and realized it wasn't. He got a presidential award for some of the work that he had done in combination with Shadow Server and some other third-party alliances that we have in the background. And there's very few companies that will state publicly, and I won't, which is that you have to get to a point where you can take offensive scenarios. So to your point, what do the cyber terrorists or the bad actors do? They share information and then they get together and they say, hey, at 4 o'clock in the morning, on a weekend in some country when everybody's got a paid holiday, let's go attack the snot out of them, right? Well, we should also say, you know what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 reputable companies are all seeing the same thing. Guess what? It's time to go take that off the internet. That stuff happens, we just don't publicize it. And so we need to do more of that so that we're, in essence, policing the internet to keep it safe, not to restrict it. But I couldn't agree with you more. The only way things get better is if it doesn't become about commercialization and the lawyers. Sorry if anybody in the room is a lawyer, but you know what happens when lawyers get involved.
But they're just not restricted by intellectual property.
Yeah, of course. Here's what's going on. How do we solve it? I mean, if you think about, to just belabor the point, we're a $4 billion revenue company. We got 12,000 people. Do I want to enter a space where I have to build a world-class on-prem DDoS solution? Or do I want to partner with somebody who's reputable, that has a capability and a technology, and partner with them to go solve my customers' problems? The latter, that's why I'm here. So.
Great. Thank you, Sean.
Ash.
It's always a pleasure.